Okay, 6:30. Before we begin, this is a reminder that it is also a remote meeting and teleconference using Zoom pursuant to 1 MRSA Section 403-A. Welcome to Sanford's Planning Board meeting of September 4th, 2024. The meeting will now come to order. This is a public proceeding, and unless the board specifically votes to go into executive session, you have the right to hear everything that is being said and to look at all the exhibits that are offered. Please notify the chair if you are unable to hear or see something. Please know that if any planning board members have potential conflicts of interest of which they are aware, they will disclose the conflict prior to the board initiating a hearing or action on an application. Since there will be a number of public hearings tonight, all persons speaking will be asked to state your name and address and then proceed. At the sole discretion of the chair, public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes per speaker. For each item, the applicant will be asked to describe the project. Thereafter, the chair will ask proponents of the project to speak, followed by opponents, and then those who are neither for nor against, but who may want to ask a question or make a general comment. Everyone who wants will have an opportunity to speak to the board through the chair. Any questions must go to and through the chair, who will then decide at what point to either ask staff or the applicant to respond. The chair may wait until after testimony has concluded to seek answers to any questions that are raised by the public or board members. Please note that rudeness, uncivil behavior, clapping, cheering, booing, etc. will not be tolerated, and if these behaviors occur, the chair at his sole discretion may terminate the hearing and reschedule for another date. In addition, the chair at his sole discretion will limit repetitious comments, though it is entirely appropriate for an individual to indicate that he or she agrees with the previous speaker. Prior to closing the public hearing, the chair will ask if there are any new comments, then the applicant will be allowed to make a single rebuttal in response to the testimony which was provided. Once the public hearing portion of the meeting is closed, the chair will accept no additional public comment. However, a member of the board at the chair's discretion may ask the applicant or a member of the public to respond to a question. This will not reopen public comment. Planning board decisions are made solely on whether the applicant has provided sufficient evidence to meet the requirements of local, state, and federal laws. In this regard, public testimony is most effective when it considers the impacts of a project in light of Sanford subdivision, site plans, shoreland, or zoning ordinances, and other relevant regulations. After the board discusses the merits of each project, it will vote on written findings of facts, which we don't have any tonight. So we'll skip that section. After the planning board makes its final decision, any reconsideration by the board must be made at the next regularly scheduled meeting. If anyone wishes to appeal a board's final decision, he or she must do so within 30 days. The city's ordinances and comprehensive plan are available for viewing on the city's website and in the Planning and Development Department's office at 919 Main Street. Remember, this is a public proceeding. You have the right to hear and see what is happening. We welcome public participation. So we have one item on our agenda. I don't think it was on this agenda, but it was on the original agenda for minutes. Is that true? Minutes for the tonight? What was that? Okay, that's what we thought. So we have minutes for August 21st, 2024. Crystal, could you just say who was here?
Yes, for the Sanford Planning Board meeting on Wednesday, August 21st, 2024, the following members were present: Jace Clark, Lenny, John, Todd, myself, and Tom. The only member who was absent was Kyle.
Okay.
With that, I would like to approve, motion to approve the meeting minutes.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? 6 with 1 abstention. Okay, so moving on to our next agenda item, new business for public hearing, file number K14-35, 5 Water Street, Jagger Lofts. Jamie, could you orient us on this, please?
Yes, good evening. This property is located on 5 Water Street in Springvale. This is the old Jagger woolen mill. The applicant is here requesting preliminary subdivision approval to convert that into approximately 86 residential units. They're going to fine tune that residential unit count in between preliminary and final submissions. It was seen at site plan, was it 2 weeks ago or was it a month ago?
It was 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. And it came out of site plan with relatively few suggestions on what to update between prelim and final.
All right, thank you.
Hi, my name is Neil Raposa. I'm with Civil Consultants here on behalf of Jagger Lofts LLC. This project, as Jamie described, is a fairly straightforward as far as mill conversions go. Conversion of an active active mill at the time. It was historically the Jagger Lofts, Jagger Mill, spinning yarn, textile productions, things like that. The existing site has the mill building, as shown here. I'm not sure we can point on this guy. So the existing mill building here is to remain, along with a receiving area that is going to be converted to a common space with a gym area, bike rack storage for residents, things like that. Sneak to the first page. This is the existing site as it is today. There is a storage/office warehouse type building in the rear of the lot that's going to be demolished to make way for the additional parking required for the residential units. The site itself will be newly landscaped to the extent that regulations allow for an industrial site such as this to be renovated. With the National Park Service is going to be kind of governing how much landscaping can be put on the site, and it's going to be fairly minimal compared to some of the other, very large sites, such as a lot of landscaping. And this is the intent on this is to keep it to that industrial look that it's had for the past 75 years. The existing parking and gravel areas will be cleared and to make way for the new parking that is proposed on this plan. There's quite a bit of parking out front on Water Street at the current loading area or former loading area that is going to be converted to lawn with just an elevated platform and towards the front of the building, again for residential use and recreation. The property will feature a small recreation area to the, here to the west of the property along Mill Street that will have several open areas for meeting space for residents and something for them to enjoy the outdoors and still be able to maintain safety from the vehicular traffic in the parking area. On this plan, it is shown a crosswalk crossing Mill Street here to connect that. That was discussed in the Technical Review Committee, and it was decided that there would be a better use to improve the sidewalk and the crossings down at the intersection of Water and Mill as opposed to keeping that up on the slope there. So that will be something that will be modified for the final plan set. And it's been taken into account per input from the city. The site itself is going to be a complete redevelopment site. So as far as DEP permitting and things like that go, and the stormwater requirements, it was shown to have a less pollutant load in the post-development condition as opposed to the pre-development. A lot of that is due to the standing delivery vehicles and things like that have a higher pollutant load. So when we look at it converted to all mostly just passenger vehicles, it's going to be a lower pollutant load, and we've submitted to the Maine DEP for approval as a full redevelopment project, and it has been received by them, and we're just awaiting review comments from them on that. Some of the major items on here that were discussed at the technical review were things that would need to be addressed in a zoning change for this lot that has been applied for to allow for the existing entrance to be used as it is now. We're not proposing any new entrances on the site. It would be a challenging feat of design and physics here to get a new entrance onto this site up on Mill Street. It's a pretty steep hill, and we propose to utilize the existing entrance as is, just improved for turning radius and for the placement of a monument sign out front, and also to accommodate more foot traffic that will be using kind of the back half of the lot here to access the parking area, and then to come along and utilize the sidewalks over at Water Street to get into downtown. Another item that was brought up at technical review was the condition of the stormwater system that this site is draining into. We did do a full stormwater analysis and modeled the entire site, and it indicated that there was less flow coming off the site than in the precondition, and that's basically due to just breaking up the site and having more landscaped areas for that runoff to go into before reaching the Water Street system. It was requested that we do an additional study to see what was happening at that Water Street system from the rest of the hillside coming down into it. And it was found that there was issues with there in the bigger storms with that flooding and overwhelming that existing culvert. Our analysis shows that our changes to the site will actually improve it slightly, but it is something that may be able to work with the city in finding a solution kind of in conjunction with City Public Works to get that done. We've been working with Matt Preventure in the engineering office to see what would be the best way to go about that. So I think that's all I have for initial presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, thanks. So we'll go through the public hearing, and then the board will take this up, and I'm sure we'll have questions for you. Before I open the public hearing, is there anything else staff would like to add?
I could add a couple items. So they are requesting a parking waiver for a reduction in the proposed parking. However, our ordinances allow for a 30% reduction for the reuse of an existing structure, and they are within that range. Recreation and open space is always something that we look for on multifamily residential buildings, and they've provided a fenced-in dog run area as well as like a patio fire pit area for residents, and then there's some internal residential amenities as well. And I think there's some discussion still with the use of the historic tax credits. There's some limit to the amount of landscaping and also the locations of Knox boxes and any kind of exterior improvements to the building to make sure that things are in line with the historical nature of the site being an industrial site. So some of those elements are a little bit out of our reach because of that program that is run by the National Park Service. So, yep, as far as the drainage goes, I know they've been working with Matt Preventure, assistant city engineer. There's some known flooding in the area, and they've provided the drainage analysis that is required to tie into the municipal system. So I think that will continue to evolve.
Great, thank you. All right, I'll declare the public hearing open. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of this project? Anybody on Zoom?
Hi, my name is David Houle. I'm from Sanford, Maine. I live on Bernier Road. I'm in favor of putting some housing because we're in dire need of housing for various financial groups of people, whether they be low income, middle income, or upper income. Anything that moves us in a positive direction would be an asset to the Sanford area. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else who would like to speak in favor of this project? Anyone who would like to speak in opposition to this project? Anyone who would like to make a general comment or ask a question? All right, declare the public hearing closed. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to step in. My name's Paul Goodwin. I'm a senior project manager with Schönberg Properties. Unfortunately, I was unable to make it to the meeting today in person. Neil, you're in good hands with Neil here, but just wanted to let you know that I am on the Zoom and am available if there are specific questions that Neil might need some owner insight on.
Okay, thank you. So last call for any comments. All right, I'll declare the public hearing closed and pick it up for planning board discussion.
Did they also ask for a waiver for the first floor not to be a commercial space? Contract zone.
You're asking for a contract zone. So that's something we're going to have to talk about, so I'm glad you brought it up.
All right.
Yeah, there's a requirement for an assessment and evidence to back up that contract zone. has any
So
work?
the contract zone is not tonight, that'll come at a subsequent meeting. So they have now applied for the contract zone. It was not applied for in time to get it on the same agenda, so that will be a subsequent discussion specifically for the zone change.
All right.
There is discussion on, they did ask for a contract zone. We're doing some internal discussion, trying to figure out the best solution to this problem. So during this process, we might actually suggest diverting course a little bit. We haven't fully wrapped our head around the best options for them. So the best option today is the contract zone agreement, but there might be other options which we haven't even discussed with them yet. So I'm not going to mention them here tonight because I'm surprising them with this. But yes, at a subsequent meeting, we will have a zone change request. Basically, commercial on the first floor, one entrance, and a small amount of signage. They're asking for a little bit bigger sign that's allowed for residential use in the zone. Those are the three items currently kind of outstanding that would have to be addressed in some way with zone changes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jamie. Any other comments from the board?
Isn't there an entrance on the back side by the parking lot?
Nope, there's not. There's kind of a flattened area up top, and then that's going to be graded out when you're looking up here. You talking about this portion up in here?
No. Right kind of in the middle of the parking lot.
Through here?
You mean access to the
An
building, Jack?
entrance into the building.
Oh, yes. Yeah, no, we're talking about entrances into the site is what
No,
we're
no,
going
no.
for the contract zone for.
There is
Yep.
another entrance on the other side of the building, right?
Correct, yep. Yep, when you're looking at this will be the main tenant entrance here, and then the entrance on the street will be for tenants that are pedestrians walking in from downtown.
Gotcha.
Please, Lenny.
Are these going to be market rate, or is there any
I-
for low income?
Paul, I don't know if you want to chime in on that one. I believe they're all market rate through here.
Yeah, we're currently anticipating it to be market rate. There is a small chance that we might work with a mission-driven lender, which would require some percent to be workforce housing, but typically that's only 10 to 20%, and that is not guaranteed that will be viable for this project. So definitely anticipating it to be all market rate.
What are the requirements for dumpster enclosure?
Screened from public view and not within a setback requirement.
Are there, on the plans, designated areas for the dumpsters?
Yes, yep, we're going to be calling for those dumpsters. I don't know if you want to pull up the plan here now. Yep, so we're going to be calling for those dumpsters up here in that northeast corner. And that'll be the front end dumpster, front end trash truck can come in, empty those and back out and leave the site and keep the interior parking lot and resident area fairly untouched when it does so. And those will be screened with, I think the plan at the moment is for a cedar fence type enclosure on those, but it'll be a fully screened fence for visual purposes.
Great, thank you.
So as I reviewed these plans, and I guess one of the things that stood out to me was the stormwater issue and the other issue with stormwater and pollutants and all that. So I'm glad you addressed that and you're working with Matt on that. So I was glad to hear that we didn't have to harp on that too long. So anything else from the board? All right. I think we're ready for you to move on and work on the next phase.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, good luck.
thanks.
Okay, so moving on to our next public hearing, which are proposed changes and updates to the city ordinance regarding regulating campgrounds. We were not able to get all of the notes captured from the last meeting and get a draft ordinance put together. But what I'd like to do right now is just kind of go through my notes as to what we put together. I did run these, I did talk with Aaron to make sure that our notes matched, and they do. And I'm going to go through them in alignment with the moratorium just to make sure that we're showing that as we're going through this process, it is a logical process to get us there. So I'm going to read just the line out of the moratorium and then what we did in the last meeting to kind of cover that. So first one is, whereas the current standards for campgrounds within this Chapter 280 zoning do not provide for adequate setbacks in residential and other developments. Before I read these, obviously these were a discussion. They were not approved. They were not anything. We're still going to be talking about these tonight, but this is just what we took for notes and what the board landed on. So during this August 7th meeting, the planning board deliberated over potential setbacks and buffering standards for campground use. Our focus was on making sure we were building setback requirements and standards that were, just like any other standards, able to be enforced easily. And so the planning department provided the results of research looking at multiple municipalities across Maine and New Hampshire, and setback and buffering standards do range quite broadly from the ordinance being silent or leaving it to the zone in question, or up to 200 feet. The board landed on the following: 50-foot vegetated buffer from a residential property line, or 100-foot setback from an existing abutting residence to include a 50-foot vegetated buffer. The board also discussed the need to clearly define the standard for a vegetated buffer. That is something that we're working on, making sure our ordinances are all very clear and we're not leaving it up to interpretation. Next one, whereas the current standards for campgrounds do not address restrictions or standards related to the time and length of said development as being seasonal year-round, and which also conflict with mobile home park standards. So during the August 7th meeting, the planning board discussed the need to define seasonality to maintain consistency with the existing standard. With an existing standard, the board reached a consensus that the seasonality standard include a window allowing camping from April 15th to November 1st. The board also reached consensus on that year-round camping would not be included in this draft ordinance. Next one, next section is, whereas the year-round use of campgrounds poses an impact on public services of waste disposal, school, and other public services are not currently addressed. So similar to the last discussion, the board was opposed to including year-round camping in the ordinance. Additionally, the board agreed that an explicit statement should be included that the campground could not be provided as a permanent residence. This is similar to many other communities. And then specifically with regards to waste disposal, we do currently already have ordinance that states that the campgrounds are able to use the transfer station as long as they are following the transfer station rules that the city, any other user of the city transfer station sets. That's part of Chapter 220, and mainly you still have to use orange trash bags, and you haul your own trash to the dump or the transfer station. And that was really it out of the ordinance, or out of the moratorium. So what we're going to do now is, since we don't have, we're going to change this up a little bit. It's not going to be if you're opposed to an ordinance or in favor of an ordinance, because we don't have an ordinance. I want to give everybody an opportunity to come up to the microphone. As we said, state your name, your address, and tell us what you think about this ordinance, where it's going to go. It'll help provide us the feedback we need to continue this process. Hopefully in the next meeting, we will have an ordinance ready to write and get sent up to the city council, who actually is the one to adopt an ordinance. So, and just a reminder, it is a 3-minute time. We have a timer now to just make sure that everybody has an even amount of time to get up here and speak.
Is the public hearing going to be left open?
Yes, the public hearing will be left open. When the ordinance actually comes in front of you, you will have another opportunity to come and hear and speak for or against, or just make a comment or ask a question on what that ordinance says before we send it to City Council. So I welcome whoever would like to come up first.
My name is David Hoyle. I come from Sanford, Maine. I live on Bernier Road. And I'm not sure what your restrictions and what you're going to allow for campgrounds. But if you're looking at a situation where it's going to create problems, I don't think it's going to be any different than any type of problem that you're going to have with a major housing development going into an area. The only advantage of a campground is there's a king in charge of the campground. Okay? There's someone in charge. So if somebody's stepping out of line, there's an annual contract. So if people step out of line at the end of the season, come contract renewal time, providing these campers all have their wheels on them and they're capable of moving, that the situation can be controlled a lot better than in a housing development where people have a house and you have a neighbor next door that's unruly or has a barking dog or is up all hours of the night. My opinion is that the campground owner or the management company that's involved should be on it and take care of these problems. A positive impact is definitely for the community. It brings in tourism. People go to Jerry's Market, they go to Shaw's Hardware, they go to Springville Hardware, they go to Rogers Super Dollar, they go to Shaw's, they go to Walmart, they go to Lowe's, they go to the lumber yards. I mean, it's such a positive impact to a community in order to have a campground. Would you put limitations on a hotel? If you put a hotel in the town of Sanford, and, well, we got one out by the old Austin store at the traffic circle, there's some sort of housing development right in over there, and not a hotel, but, there's a complex there. And I'm sure management is in control. If somebody's out of control, they don't renew their contract. To say that it's going to be wild, wild west in a campground, they're so wrong. People are so wrong about the camping industry. Year-round camping, it's starting now. Year-round camping, there's a Normandyville, I believe, in Normandy Farms in Massachusetts, and they run year-round. You're bringing tourists in the community year-round. They might come up to go skiing, in the New Hampshire area where they can't afford to stay in the mountains. You're an hour commute. You still can go to the ocean. There's so much that Sanford has to offer to kind of stagnate an industry with real strong restrictions. I think it's going to be a detriment to the community. It's a viable industry for the community.
Good evening, folks. My name is Bonnie Patterson. I live at 93 Siddle Road. I'm a long-term resident of Sanford. And professionally speaking, I've got an MBA. I'm a certified project management professional. I successfully led a $28 million organization within a Fortune 100 company. And as an associate member of the outdoor hospitality industry, I've spent the last 4 years collecting information and learning how to start, construct, and run a campground. I'd like to follow up on the winter campground topic with some specific statistics. An interesting trend is that winter is the fastest growing season, with far more campers braving the cold in winter than they did pre-pandemic. The growth for winter camping is over 40%. In fact, 31% of campers state that they would definitely like to try winter camping. And were you aware that there is already camping in the winter in the state of Maine? Links to these statistics can be found in the slide deck that Michael and I previously provided, starting on page 2 for you to verify. RKG Associates has been helping the city with update the comprehensive plan. They recently told the committee that visitation in Sanford is up during the winter and summer. Here's some food for thought on why winter camping is taking off. Winter campers enjoy local sites and activities year-round, like the Sanford Performing Arts Center, or they may want to experience ice skating, ice fishing, cross-country skiing, or simply going for a winter walk in the woods. Perhaps they want to go to the coast and walk the beach and maybe do some clam jigging, or maybe they just want to combine a vacation with remote work and enjoy nature while they're doing that. Travelers are often tired of staying in small hotel rooms and are looking for a better overall experience. They are looking for places that are homier with space to enjoy outdoor activities. Campgrounds can provide that year-round. To address safety concerns, winter camping could be restricted to properly insulated and heating RV units and cabins. Builders are already prepared to comply with state and local requirements. Please refer to slide number 6 in the document that we provided. Campers prefer to be in wooded locations near ponds, streams, and lakes. Many neighbors in these areas occupy cottages that are primarily occupied during summer months. Their primary residences being located out of town or out of state. Sanford's local businesses could be benefiting from campers' increased visits in our city. Winter camping is a quiet, safe, and growing activity that will bring income to Sanford small businesses year-round. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to come up and speak? I do know that there's folks on Zoom also that are looking to talk.
Hello, can I speak?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Brian Dumont. I'm a lifelong resident of Sanford at 148 Sandy Point Road on Sand Pond in South Sanford. I represent the Sand Pond Association, which we formed. We have about 78 members currently who live on or around Sand Pond or have summer homes there. Many of us for many decades. So we know the area very well. We love it. And I have to tell you that when you look at the way it is today, the current campground ordinance does not allow for a number of things that would allow it to continue the way it is. Let me give you one example. We did a study, the Sand Pond Association did a study of density of people within the surrounding area of the lake. And what we found was that prior to the approval of Utopia Campground, which is on the western shore of Sand Pond, we estimated that there were approximately, if you look at the number of people around the lake that had access to it, you would come to something like 3,200 square feet of lake per person with access to the water. With Utopia, that decreased to something like 2,400 square feet of lake per person. And with a current proposal or a proposal that maybe is
I need to stop
actively
you
on the table.
Excuse me, I need to stop you there. We are not talking about a proposal right now. We are talking about the ordinance that will cover the entire city of Sanford, not one project. So
yes, I understand that, but I'm giving an example of what this ordinance does not cover, if I may. So as an example, we are looking at density and the preservation of what is the actual natural attraction. Natural attraction is space in one part. That is, whenever you're in the outdoors, you feel like you're communing with nature, not tons of people around you. And when we look at the number of people that can congregate in an area, it went from 3,200 per square foot down to 1,400 square foot. That is not probably something that is written into an ordinance, but it is the real impact. Also, it does not allow for specific circumstances. For instance, in many people's minds, and I know mine, I was an Eagle Scout, and I did a lot of camping all around the state of Maine. And we think of a campground as sort of separate and off on its own. And in fact, that's not necessarily the case. The current campground ordinance doesn't, for instance, address how a campground could actually be wrapped around and within existing neighborhoods. And that is the case, again, with the Sand Pond example. For that reason, we have proposed a citywide our citywide suggestions for improvements to the campground ordinance based on examples that we are aware of, that we're familiar with. A colleague of mine, Paul, who's also a member of our association, is going to present some details to you on our studies and how we could improve the impact and reduce the impact to make sure that, in fact, the real attractions to Sanford are maintained.
All right, I'm going to have to stop you now. Your time is up. In the fairness of everyone else, there's a lot of people in this room to make sure everybody gets a chance. Thank you.
Thank you, councilors, for your time.
Chairman Morgan, members of the planning board, I've been to a lot of your meetings.
Could you just state your name and address, please?
I'm about to do that.
Okay.
I've been to a lot of meetings, so it's time for me to introduce myself. My name is Paul Fritchie. My wife, Ian Rodier, and I own property at 43 Sand Pond Road since 1988. I'm presenting our own views, and I've tried to summarize the views of the Sand Pond Association. My experience as a camper has been as a boy, never camping in an area where anybody else could see you. You had privacy, the neighbors had privacy. You'll go to New Hampshire to the Appalachian Mountain Club facilities. None of those, whether they're lodges, huts, cabins, are anywhere near anybody else. So the suggestions we're going to make are for universal applicability for the entire city for all future campgrounds. Apache need not worry, they're grandfathered. First, the question you have to look at the fact that a campground in an existing residential area can be absolutely disastrous for existing residents with noise, traffic, congestion, smoke, barking dogs, clearly diminished property values, and reduced privacy. That's never the intention of the campground owners. It's likely to happen. It seems to me to be unavoidable. A campground is a business that should only be in a residential area under narrow circumstances. So where should they be located? The existing Sanford ordinances list them as permitted uses in the rural residential zone and the rural mixed-use zone. The rural residential zone, according to the ordinance, is to promote high-quality environments while maintaining the rural character of the area. The rural mixed-use district, however, is designed to foster a working rural environment. If you look at the permitted uses, you see the differences. Only in a rural mixed-use zone can you have such businesses as marijuana production, power sport vehicle sales and services, and some retail stores. Given the potentially destructive impact of any new campground on nearby residences, we strongly recommend that new campgrounds be prohibited from the rural residential zone and limited to the rural mixed-use zone. That's a decision not made, a recommendation not made lightly. Also, since many types of businesses are separated from one for the other to protect neighbors, we recommend that no new campground be within 3 miles of an existing one or in the same small body of water. So how much space is necessary for setbacks, buffers, and acreage? We strongly recommend a 200-foot. I can pass this on to somebody else. I'm about halfway done, or with your permission, I can continue.
Just to make it fair, if you want to pass on to somebody else.
Starting right here.
My name is Ann Rodier, and we have a residence, we have owned property at 43 Sand Pond Road since 1988. So for how much space is necessary for setbacks and buffers and acreage, we strongly recommend a 200-foot setback from property lines with a 50-foot buffer and a 10-acre minimum size lot and a 5-square-foot campsite size. The 200-foot distance is the minimum necessary to protect privacy, enjoyment of one's property, and to lessen the inevitable reduction in property values. 200 feet is particularly necessary because buffers don't always work. Sometimes a developer intentionally or carelessly cuts too much, such as what took place at Hanson's Ridge, or a developer cuts the buffer area before or during the application period. A meaningful buffer can take decades to grow back. The 200-foot distance from residences was chosen by 11 York County municipalities, reflecting the individual judgments of thoughtful town officials. We recommend 200 feet from the property line for ease of administration. Likewise, the 10-acre requirement, which seems small, was adopted independently by 10 York County municipalities. How should the campgrounds be regulated? Neighbors cannot rely on Marketplace to regulate campgrounds. Counting on a poorly run business to fail does not protect the neighbors from ongoing problems. The city must set reasonable regulations and enforce them. The planning board imposed operating requirements when it approved Hutopia. Yellowstone has even more extensive regulation than we are proposing. Regulations should include quiet hours, only allowing dogs with current vaccination, complying with state laws regarding importation of firewood and guest registration, on-site 24-hour staffing, and security, along with an on-site office and no watercraft to avoid overcrowding and the introduction of invasive plants. Likewise, to reduce noise and accidental pollution, neither hot tubs nor swim spas should be allowed. Numerous businesses are regulated by the city. How should new applications be categorized? Campgrounds, like over 40 uses in Sanford, must be treated as conditional uses rather than permitted uses. If an antique shop or a child care facility or drive-through at a bank are subject to conditional use standards, then campgrounds certainly should be. This change would permit a more tailored review of any future proposal. What's the proper seasonal limitation? We recommend May 15th to October 15th, which is generally consistent with Apache, Hutopia, and Yellowstone. This was an area of concern specifically listed in the moratorium. Thank you.
I do see another hand up on Zoom. We'll get to you after the speaker. Thank you.
Should I continue?
Please.
Thank you. Joe Hardy. I own property at 31 Siddall Road on Sand Pond. Let me continue with the association's presentation. Should there be occupancy limits? The response of a developer to one of our earlier submissions suggested that there must be. The response stated, "Please keep in mind that some campers sleep 12 or more people, and perhaps the occupancy limits should be limited to what the camper or RV is rated for, as well as an additional tent on the campsite for up to 4 people." Those comments demonstrate the need for occupancy limits and show the reasonableness of our other suggestions to protect the neighbors from a large business. Water quality. Members of the zoning subcommittee of the City Council were interested in water quality issues. Our members believe that there are 2 types of concerns for any campground near water. First are the issues that arise during construction. Water quality testing before, during, and after construction is warranted. The second concern is the overuse of any water body, either by the new campground alone or in combination with an existing one. Small ponds and rivers can only handle so many people, so many kayaks and paddle boards before either the water quality deteriorates or the enjoyment of the water by the existing residential property owners degrades. We suggest that a proposal for a new campground with water access be required to demonstrate that water quality will not be damaged by the construction of or operation of the campground, and that the number of people using the water body on a typical Sunday will not increase by more than 25%. To protect any water body, a campground, or at least recreational vehicles should be prohibited from the shoreland zone. Park model RVs. They should be treated as dwellings because that is what they are. While motor vehicle laws may treat them as RVs, the Sanford zoning ordinance can be written to exclude them from that category. Thank you very much for your time. I will hopefully come back with some private comments if time warrants. Thank you for your consideration.
I can't see your name on the Zoom, but if you want to take the time.
Hi. Yeah, my name is Kathleen Walsh, and I'm here to generally speak about campgrounds across the U.S. My company is Advanced Outdoor Solutions. We have designed, built, and managed in about 30 of the 50 states. We have also assisted municipalities such as yours in adopting their campground regulations. Our most recent municipality is Wolcott, Indiana. We're helping them with their public RV park and campground. So I'd like to speak in general terms rather than what seems to be tonight to be more specific to the Sand Pond property. I'd like to talk about operations and environmental concerns as a general rule. So in our campgrounds regarding water quality, if we destroy the water, we're running our campers away. So we find as we go into a town to build a campground that most water damage has come from either lawn runoff, i.e. fertilization, or from septic tanks that are leaching or too close to the water. So my campgrounds take great pride in protecting the waterways by accelerated wastewater treatment options. Secondly, we always at our parks have a 6-person maximum for the site. And normally in our base fee only covers 4, which is 2 adults and 2 children. So if you wish to bring 2 extra people, you have to pay for those extra people. We also highly discourage any additional vehicles. If you bring additional vehicles, you have to pay $12 a day for those. And we do that to limit the number of vehicles that are coming onto the site. Length of stay restrictions, we certainly have them across the US. Even in places where we're open year round, our typical length of stay restriction is 6 months. And that's because many times in Florida, Texas, snowbird areas, that's the amount of time people wish to come and stay. So year-round camping, as one of the speakers stated, is becoming more and more popular, particularly for people who like to ski and can't afford a $300 a night rental unit. They like to stay in an RV park and campground, but certainly 6 months restrictions are something we adhere to pretty much universally across the US. Thus, we never become affordable housing, and we never become a place where families can come and register their children in the schools. So those seem to be some of the concerns. The typical setback at our park is 50 feet, sometimes 100 feet with a vegetated buffer. Quiet hours are typically 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. the next morning. There's usually a manager on site that can take care of any issues. And we have strong dog restrictions in place that must adhere by the state laws, as well as specific laws to our campgrounds regarding yipping, yapping, constant barking. We make everyone provide. Thank you. That's just general rules that we use across the United States.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to make any comments?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Michael Patterson. I lived at 93 Siddle Road on Sand Pond. I have for over 20 years. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you the information I've collected over the last several years about campgrounds and how they positively impact the community of Sanford. I'd like to start by reading to you a short piece of information from the Sanford Comprehensive Plan that the city is currently trying to update. It says, "We are losing our middle-class population and are in danger of becoming a community of lower-income, less educated residents," end quote. My family, my entire family, has left Sanford. All 4 of my brothers, my 6 cousins, my parents, my uncles, and even my children are leaving Sanford. I retired from a software company I sold several years ago, and now I'm helping my daughter get started in real estate. We work with a lot of buyers, and often these buyers tell me they don't want to look in Sanford. The Sanford Comprehensive Plan goes on to say, quote, "Changing this pattern will require the entire community, the municipal government, the school system, the business community, and the community's leaders and residents, that they undertake a comprehensive effort to change the direction of Sanford Springvale," end quote. I'm determined to be part of the change that Sanford is about to witness. Starbucks is coming. I heard that Aldi Grocery Stores is looking to make a move to Sanford. Mark Motors is one of the nicest dealerships in southern Maine, and I want to be a part of that. Did you know that the average camping family spends $200 a day in the local community? That is money being spent outside the campground. This is $200 per day per camping family being spent every day at Sanford businesses like the Third Alarm Diner, Smitty's, El Mexicano, Franny's Mini Donuts, Shane's of Maine, our grocery stores. They are also paying to play pickleball, visit the YMCA, and dozens of other businesses. Many of the people wanting to put tight restrictions on campgrounds in Sanford, like no winter camping or 200-foot setbacks, only live near a campground for a few months of the year. In fact, a good percentage leave Sanford for most of the year. These opposers are not contributing significantly to Sanford's community for most of the year. If, as a community, Sanford puts in place a reasonable campground ordinance that doesn't play favorites to seasonal residents, this will be just one more good decision that will take Sanford back to its former positive reputation. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Tom Bucacci. I recently separated from 6 years in the United States Air Force, and now I own a local landscaping company that does work for various campgrounds and RV parks in both Wells, Sanford, and Ogunquit. I'm happy to learn that this planning board has decided to focus on the broader picture of how campgrounds can be introduced into communities harmoniously while minimizing the impact to the local environment and the neighbors who may not want something new in their backyard. I think that most of us would agree that nearly every house or business that is introduced to an undisturbed piece of land has some impact on the local environment. This impact, however, can absolutely be minimized depending on the use. A campground is one of the most ecologically friendly uses of land. As neighbors speak up tonight advising strong restrictions on campgrounds, I believe that some rules that apply to a resident should also apply to the campground. Here are some examples. When Christmas lights are put up in your yard, it might be considered warm and festive. Then likewise, it shouldn't be considered light pollution when somebody at a campground does it. When a neighbor's dog barks every day, the local community may consider it part of the neighborhood, but when the same dog barks at a campground, it should not become noise pollution. When several cottages on a pond are potentially leaking sewage into the body of water, it might be generally accepted by the community surrounding the pond. But the damage caused by this pollution shouldn't stop the development of a campground that follows the rules of the zone, especially if they have permission from the Department of Environmental Protection. And certainly, the ecological damage done by the neighbors that impacts wildlife shouldn't be blamed on a campground. The truth is that the source of pollution is sometimes difficult to identify, and just because this is a new campground, it shouldn't be blamed for damages that may have been caused by existing cottages for the last several decades. Folks, we are talking about campgrounds, not industrial manufacturing plants that may spew out pollution into local ponds and rivers. The sounds produced from campers is no different from your existing neighbors, but campgrounds have rules against barking dogs, excessive lights, and unwanted behaviors like littering. I'm glad the City of Sanford is trying to ensure that campgrounds become a valuable asset to the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
I got a PowerPoint I just put in there real quick. Just if you can help me maybe.
Ben? Is Ben here?
While we wait for that, can I ask one question?
Can
The
you help
last
him with a
speaker
flash
did
drive?
not state where he resided. You didn't ask him where he resided. I'd like to know where he resides. Why is he speaking if you're not a member of the Sanford community? Why did you let him speak? Is that fair?
The city has let other people speak from other communities when it's
Okay, thank you for that answer.
things like ATV
So
clubs
I'm
and
not
all
going to
that.
tell you where
So
I live, all right? Is that okay?
He has a flash drive he wants to.
we'd like to know where you live.
Okay.
I apologize for not
All right,
questioning
thank you.
him.
I'll tell you.
Didn't catch it.
Thank you, no problem.
What is this? Just out of curiosity.
Just a PowerPoint. I want to bring. Thank you for doing that. Don't stop my time yet. Always doing that. All right, thank you. I got it right here.
All right, what I'd like to do is minimize that.
It's here, yeah.
Yep. And take this, drag it out here, then play it from the computer. Otherwise, it doesn't always work off the flash drive. There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead. Directly. Flash drive back.
All right, thank you. Okay, my name is David Dubois, and I live on Sand Pond Road. Been here for all my life. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. I just want to, in 3 minutes, shorten what I had to say. I had a 5-minute presentation, but I'll do the best I can in 3 minutes. I want to show you a plan. Is that up there? Okay. I want to show you a plan, and it doesn't matter where this plan is. It's in Sanford, but this is a campground proposal plan. I don't care whose it is, where it is, or what it is. It's just something that's good for us to look at.
Just 1 second. I'm going to ask not to show this plan. This plan is specific to a project that is currently put on moratorium, so we cannot show this plan.
All right, this plan shows 17 homes in a shoreland zone. This plan the town of Sanford does not allow 17 homes in a shoreland zone. But however, you can have RVs in a shoreland zone, and they probably could have 17 RVs, park models, in a campground. This is in conflict with the Sanford subdivision ordinance on homes. Single-family homes can only have probably one home in that project I was showing you there, instead of 17 campers. That's a conflict. We should keep the things the same as a single-family residence. It is a single-family residence. It's up to basically 12 people in a camper, 4 people in a tent, and 2 guests every day, or 3 guests every day. And I think we're fortunate to have a plan like this that I was able to reference, because it shows us what maybe a developer's going to try to do to circumvent some of these subdivision laws. In fact, the town council specifically mentioned that sneaking around the subdivision laws is one of the main reasons that they passed a moratorium. Someone is trying to get around the subdivision laws by putting 17 homes in an area where only 1 home should be allowed. Also, it's packing people against neighbors. And it's packing homes against neighbors, 7 homes next to an abutter, septic systems, roads, parking lots. That's not what Apache Campground is. This is a specific issue that needs to be addressed in the ordinance.
I need to stop you, please. You are not talking about anything that has to do with an ordinance. You're talking specifically about a project that you don't want in your neighborhood, and that's fine. That's for another time if that project ever comes to bear. If you would like to speak about an ordinance, please talk about that.
Yes, I would like to speak about an ordinance. Can I have my time back when he spoke, or?
No.
So that loophole regarding ordinances, I'm talking about an ordinance, is something that should be closed. And I hope that the planning board takes that seriously. It's very important that we get this right. Protect the neighbors, protect the neighborhoods with ordinances that make sense to this town. With that, I object to the 3 minutes that I had to speak, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Margaret Patterson. I live at 93 Siddle Road in Sanford, Maine, and I have for over 2 decades now. I'm reading this note on behalf of Stephen Bushy, who is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Maine with greater than 35 years of professional experience in land development, or Land Development, Design, and Permitting. I am unable to attend tonight's board meeting due to a previous commitment, so I've asked that my comments be read into the record on my behalf. Foremost, I am the consultant engineer for a family who has engaged our firm to assist with their proposed eco-friendly campground in Sanford. I've come to understand their background, goals, and dreams for a community which they have lived in for over 20 years. First, I want to say that I understand and respect that the City of Sanford is trying to update your land use ordinance on a community-wide basis and not just place a few restrictions on specific campground projects in order to appease a few neighbors. Far too often, land use provisions are targeted only when a proposal is unwelcomed by neighbors. I understand that in 2013, the town of Sanford decided to become a city. So what does this mean? Well, city status can sometimes provide a needed boost to communities. City status opens up new opportunities and creates optimism for the people that live there. Foremost, a city means it welcomes businesses. As you consider any updates to your land use code and specifically campground ordinance, I advise thoughtful and careful consideration as to whether you're saying to everyone in Sanford that the city is open for business. The new ordinance may, of course, include a few new restrictions, and with that, the goal of the city should be to generally embrace businesses that will have a positive impact on the community. Throughout Maine and the country, campgrounds are allowed in residential zones because they mix well within housing communities. For example, they make the same impact as a residential community, but with one big added distinction. They have rules that govern the campers' behaviors and are enforced by not only the campground operator, but the city code enforcement office, and most importantly, the neighbors, who can more effectively wield influence on code enforcement. Neighboring residences, on the other hand, often make many of their own rules and decide on their own what they will put up with. Finally, I'd like to say that placing excessive setbacks on an eco-friendly campground to appease a few upset neighbors could likely hurt other well-intentioned development proposals in the city. Additional campgrounds in Sanford are certainly an opportunity that has broader implications to the community, and yet, as a designer, I can assure you that these developments can be done fairly and reasonably to the benefit of all parties in the greater Sanford community. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Good evening. My name's Peter Bockley. I live at 14 Sand Pond Road, and I'm a newbie. 3 years here in the town, and we've fallen in love. And I just want to say thank you to the board for your due diligence in working on this to make it safe for our community, as well as provide growth for the community. And one thing I've learned so far in Sanford is that you want to look to the future. You want to improve the quality of the town and the city for all the people here. That's what you should be doing as part of this project. It's important to have regulations in place. I've lived in other areas where campgrounds were put in and the regulations kept them a part of the community, became a friendly neighbor to the people that lived there. I've also seen where regulations were not in place and the campgrounds became dumping zones, and it disturbed the peace of all the people in the neighborhood around them, only to fill the pockets of the developer. So I appreciate the daunting task you have in doing this, and thank you for it.
Thank you. I'm sorry, you already spoke, though.
I spoke for the association. I don't think I used my 3 minutes.
I'm sorry, you already had your chance to speak. You used it for the association, but that's the only way we can make this fair. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Okay. Like I said, there'll be another opportunity. We will suspend the public hearing, but it will remain open until.
Tom, just 1 second. We do have one email that came in from somebody that was not able to attend.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's good.
This one? Right? The here is.
That's not the right one.
Oh, maybe that was it.
Did you get the email today?
No.
I'm sorry, I'm wrong. We was expecting an email to come in that doesn't appear as though it came in. I disregard.
Okay, thank you. So like I said, we'll keep this public hearing open. Once the ordinance is drafted, I will have a discussion now as to where we're going to move forward. Then the next meeting, we will actually hold a public hearing to go through the ordinance and the standards that we will draft.
Do we need a motion to table?
Yes.
Motion to table discussion?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
Table and discussion, or just the?
Table the public hearing.
Put off the public hearing until the next meeting.
Yeah.
All right, all in favor? 7-0. Okay, before we bring it up, I just want to send it over to staff and see if there's any input based on between meetings that you'd like to add to this to help us with our discussion.
Hi, so during the workshop, we discussed setbacks a little bit. I was hoping that the board would reconsider what we had initially decided or thought. I think that a property line setback, whatever you decide the setback should be, it would be a lot easier to enforce a property line setback than some from a residence. In addition to, I think it could affect the uniformity of the project in general, and it would be a nightmare to try and enforce.
Thanks, Alex. Does everybody understand that? All right. So I'll open it up to board discussion, or we can start there if you'd like.
I think that makes sense.
So currently, what we drafted, what we discussed in the last meeting was a 15-foot or a 50-foot vegetated buffer or setback with a 50-foot buffer from the property line, and then 100 feet from a residential dwelling. As Alex said, that's going to be very difficult to enforce, especially with the differences in where these the abutting houses are to the property. So I think it makes sense to look at it from a property line because that's fixed. So I'd like to see what the board thinks.
Split the difference, 75 feet with a 50-foot buffer.
With a 50-foot vegetated buffer and a 75-foot?
From the property line.
Any other thoughts on the board?
That's what we just put on a solar farm in rural residential.
I will say that will yield similar results in a generic fashion. The two zones that these are allowed to be placed in have a minimum setback of 15 feet and a required combined setback of 40. So that means anywhere from 15 to 25 feet is the required setback. So if you take a 25-foot setback to the structure plus your 50-foot buffer, that equals the 75 feet that you just proposed. So I think if you choose the 75-foot setback to the property line, that is very similar way of thinking that you guys had last meeting at a 50-foot vegetated buffer and a 100-foot setback.
Okay. Any other discussion on that?
Is it easier for you, Alex?
One is easier no matter what. We can actually measure from that. We can use GIS. Additionally, I think it would be an added cost to a developer in any project to measure from a residence because then you need to survey out all of those as well, which I think it just becomes messy later on down the road. I think it's so much cleaner to go from a property line. That's what everything else is based on.
And I'll just do a follow-up, similar, different. Last meeting when we were discussing this, we discussed the 50-foot vegetated buffer. When we bring this ordinance forward, I'm going to have a definition for what vegetated buffer means as well. Because right now, in our current ordinance, generically, not just for campgrounds, but generically across the board, our vegetated buffer description is almost non-existent. So I think just so that all developers, campgrounds, and any developer in the future will more clearly understand what a vegetated buffer means with an updated definition. So I am going to bring forward an updated definition once staff determines the best word smithing for that, and for your review as well.
Yeah, I mean, so the one piece I do have, I'm okay with the number. We've seen it multiple times now, where the developer, prior to proposing a development, liquidates the lot, or, oops, I cleared the buffer.
Hence why we're going to create a definition for vegetated buffer. That means if you don't have a natural vegetated buffer that meets that, you're going to be required to plant it so it does.
Which is expensive.
Correct. So I mentioned last time, vegetation could be grass. Is grass going to provide any sort of buffer? Absolutely not. No. Vegetation could be ornamental. They have grass that's 3 feet tall that a lot of people plant in gardens. Is that going to provide a buffer? Absolutely not. So again, I think we need to define what vegetated buffer means, just for clarity across the board.
Yep. And on a project-by-project basis, we're able to talk about buffering as well. Like, say the topic of winter camping came up again. If you have an oak tree in the wintertime, that's not going to provide much buffering compared to an evergreen.
Right, so we're going to have to get creative in how we define a vegetative buffer in a way that people understand it, it's achievable, and not subjective. And I think in any buffering scenario, we have to give, there's 10 ways to get to any finish line. So vegetated buffer, we can't say you have to plant 3 hardwood trees, 3 softwood trees, flowers, et cetera. It can't be that specific. So I've already started trying to look up other municipalities' ordinances to try to get a good definition, and it's going to be our tall task. This is actually going to be one of my hardest parts to help get this right, because every ordinance provision we have, not every, most ordinance uses we have requires some sort of buffer with no clear guidance in what that means. We've struggled with that in several of our last approvals. So it's becoming a common theme. When it becomes a common theme, we need to fix it. So it is something I've been thinking about now for months. I haven't found a magic solution yet. Luckily, we have a very talented staff here that gets pretty creative, so I have confidence that we'll get there. But it's going to be a tough battle.
Can you do that with a fence?
So in a lot of our buffering provisions today, it does say fences might be considered by the planning board as an alternative. It says that berms might be considered a alternative. So that's all part of you guys' discussion when we get there. But in some cases, if you have a natural or man-made 40-foot berm on the side of a project, there is no better buffer than a solid wall of dirt, as long as it's beautified. So in some cases, it could be a 40-foot berm with grass on it, and that might be okay with you guys. So we have to word it such that it creates the intent without handcuffing somebody.
Am I all set to change topics?
Please.
So one of the issues I have, and I've seen with several of proposals that people have made or ideas, has to deal with the operations of a business. And from a purely zoning and land use, I don't really find it appropriate to include operations. I'm not saying they're inappropriate or not appropriate. I just don't think it is in our jurisdiction to make those determinations. I think that's up to something with the council in regards to licensing. And some of the other issues have had other jurisdictions, like the importation of wood is a state law. As far as water quality testing, I'm not sure that's something we can actually dictate or regulate, or because it's not that we can't tell someone to do it or do something about it. How do you enforce it?
So I would agree. City of Sanford does have a fairly vigorous licensing chapter. We're adding new uses to that yearly. And the licensing chapter is an opportunity to more closely regulate a business when it isn't directly related with zoning concerns. Because you are correct, your job as the planning board is basically the zoning concerns. In some cases, the city council does want more restrictive rules than you guys have the power to place. And in that case, we do have a licensing chapter that we then add those additional regulations. The strongest one that comes to mind tonight is the marijuana chapter. So marijuana is a business that is cannabis, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to call it cannabis now. The cannabis industry is forever evolving, and because a lot of the changes had nothing to do with zoning, we created a license for the cannabis uses, and we regulate the cannabis uses through the licensing chapter. So a lot of the issues that some of the people spoke about tonight, if the city council chooses, would be better placed in a licensing chapter than a zoning chapter.
I'd further reiterate that a business naturally isn't going to go to the zoning chapter of our, ordinance to figure out what regulations are placed on their business.
Yet we're requiring them a seasonality issue. Shouldn't that be left up to the business to decide? I mean, we discussed that last meeting about all kinds of stuff. It's a business decision.
Or licensing.
Currently, campgrounds don't need a license, do they?
Currently, campgrounds do not have a local license. They have, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys get a lodging license?
Yes, we do, and we have the state.
So we do have a local lodging license, but there's no specific requirements in it pertaining to these types of questions. It's generic to hotels, motels, campgrounds.
So seasonality would be, if we look at the 50 different municipal codes that we went through, the majority, any of them that called out, they'll call it seasonality, and the majority of them call out seasonality. So yeah, is that gray area of what falls under our purview?
Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but there's a thing called climate change, and things are getting warmer, and winters are getting less and less.
So one of the things I think we should do is maybe point that out in our recommendation to the city council. We can still give an opinion per se, or if this was included in the zoning ordinance, this is what we would suggest. However, we do believe this might qualify as a licensing issue or benefit in another section of the chapter that's outside of our purview.
I think that's an option. We could draft it as part of Chapter 280, the zoning ordinance, with a caveat that if the council decides to make licensing amendments for campgrounds, that's something that could and really should be in the licensing chapter. I think we could do it that way.
Could we require an operations manual like we do with gravel pits?
So that potentially could be an option in a license. We require operations manuals for the cannabis industry, for the mineral extraction industry. So yes, we are, again, as we evolve our licensing chapter, we are getting more specific for specific uses, and that could be a requirement if the council so chose. The planning board doesn't really have the purview of discussing the licensing chapter. That's just the council. But you guys can definitely make recommendations to the council on what you guys feel should or shouldn't be included. But it would be less of a formal recommendation. It would.
But even the ordinance we come up with, they can change it if they don't like it.
Correct.
that is correct. The council is, the planning board gives a recommendation to council. Council is the group the board that approves or amends ordinances.
Yeah, our role is advisory in this case.
I would just like to put on the record that I strongly encourage not wording something that would, grandfather existing campgrounds. I think it's slightly unfair that several businesses have been operating in the city without issue for many years. And then, if some of these things go to licenses.
So as far as the zoning ordinance, we already have a legally non-conforming
Correct.
use section for the zoning ordinance. So any zoning changes, the existing campgrounds would be grandfathered, what we call legally non-conforming. Licensing chapter takes those considerations different than the zoning ordinance. In some cases, there are some things that are grandfathered, and in some cases, nothing is grandfathered. That would be specific to that chapter in the licensing chapter, that section in the licensing chapter.
I'd also like to address the issue of campgrounds in rural residential. It is the zone that makes the most sense for campgrounds. You don't go to Boston to go camping. You don't go to a sawmill to go camping. It is purely natural. So I strongly oppose any change to restrict it from rural residential.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from Lenny? Got anything?
Thank you.
So let's just talk about the operations manual since it got brought up. Now, when we have an operations manual, it's for these industries that have shown a need for regulation, for a much more stronger regulation. Things like, obviously cannabis is a controlled substance. It's still federally not legal. And then you have gravel pits where we're digging down to within 5 feet of the water table and running diesel equipment over it. So obviously there's a lot more risk to the environment. Is that the reason we have those products?
Operations manuals are for that reason, and it's also a mechanism so that everybody knows what is supposed to be happening at that facility. So for mineral extraction, you have the owner. Say I own a gravel pit. In most larger scale gravel pits, which is what most people run nowadays, I'm not on the site. So I bring it before you guys, I get approval, I agree to all this stuff. And then I'm paying somebody $15 an hour to drive a loader and doesn't know any of this. So he's out there just bouncing around in the loader all day. The operations manual has to be on site. They have to have it available for everybody to review. When we do our inspections, we ask the employees if they know where it is and if they've read it. So it's really a document that helps educate the employees if they weren't aware of some of the rules that are placed on them. Again, these are industries that typically have more restrictive rules placed on them than say, a McDonald's or a KFC. So it's important that everybody that's in that environment understands those rules. So it's a document, one, they have to demonstrate to us they know what they have to do, and then it's a document kind of to help their employees know what they have to do.
It's like if they have an oil spill or something, there's something in there and who they're supposed to call.
Correct.
I know Dave Parent's really concerned about that.
In our cannabis industry, we have operations that are called manufacturings, but they're doing extraction with very, very flammable materials. Obviously, me and Alex are very concerned about very, very flammable materials with people in the booths. So the operations manuals are taken very seriously.
Kind of similar to a homeowners association, isn't it?
I didn't hear that.
A homeowners association, wouldn't it be similar? I mean, like an operations manual?
Homeowners' documents are similar. I mean, I'm not going to say they're exact, but yes, they are put in place so that before you purchase a lot or a house within a development, you kind of know your restrictions.
Right.
Me and Alex are kind of hold two sides of the equation now here. So we get calls, I'm going to say weekly so I don't exaggerate. Sometimes it's daily, sometimes it's hourly, from random people that live in developments that have been approved for some cases a month, some cases 40 years. And they have no idea that they're in an association and what that means. It never ceases to amaze me how some people buy property that never read their deed. I've lived here 40 years. You're telling me there's an association? Yep. And it says you can't cut that tree. But it's my tree. So, yes, they don't always work because, again, we take calls very frequently. But with the operations manuals and stuff, we do inspections, some scheduled, some not. So we physically ask the people working, not the owners of the businesses, the actual ones, boots on the ground. And most of the time, they're very aware of what it is, where it is, and what it says. So an operations manual, I think, does work. And you mentioned, like, if they have a fuel spill at a mineral extraction site. Sanford is very blessed that we have some very, very good mineral deposits. It just so happens that the same mineral deposits that the gravel industry is after is the same mineral deposits that our water district is after, because it creates perfect water and very, very large quantities of it. So you have a use that it is of utmost importance to protect public water supplies, and we have a use that is driving diesel equipment over it 12 hours a day, sometimes 6 days a week. So, yet I say that every one of our gravel pits is on a town aquifer, and we've had very, very, very few and very minor incidents when it comes to diesel spills or oil spills, and all of them have been handled professionally, quickly, and adequately to prevent any injury to our water supply. So again, another example of how the operations manuals work. Phone calls are made within seconds of that operator doing a mistake. And if you catch it quick, you can solve it when it's a wheelbarrow full of dirt that's contaminated before it destroys a town well.
Thanks. I appreciate the background into that. I guess we go back to, are we considering that that's something that we should have in this area? I mean, this use is a lot different than a gravel pit.
It sounds like it would be required if it was a license, I guess.
It could be required. I don't think it's not mandatory. Not every industry, not every business has an operations manual.
Yeah. Do have to remember, I think we think campgrounds, we think people sleeping in tents and campers and so forth. Several of the campgrounds I've been to have had accessory uses, where, when a food truck comes in, people, the public, are welcome. Outdoor music entertainment. We have, what about racquetball courts? 50 feet from a boundary line with a racket court. In other communities has proven to be a hot topic. So there is other activities that aren't just associated with sleeping.
Are you referring to amenities, though? I mean, we ask subdivisions now to put those amenities in, or just a housing subdivision, as part of their layout. So,
but we had a campground request. I believe it was approval for a bar, if my memory serves correct.
The last campground that got approved, which was approved about a year or so ago now, they do have a kids' play area on their plan. And believe it or not, just to touch on that, and I'm talking a lot, so I apologize. We get calls, I'm going to say, every several months of people complaining about children's laughter at a playground. I love kids. I don't think I'll ever complain, even when I'm old and grouchy, that I love the sound of kids playing, but we actually get calls from people saying, I can't stand the racket from my neighbor that has a daycare and the kids are playing in the backyard. So children's laughter is sometimes a legitimate complaint coming from abutters.
Please, go ahead.
I don't think an operations manual is a bad idea. I'm not sure children's laughter would be something that would appear in the operations manual, but, I mean, I guess it would be more or less restrictive depending on the industry that you're trying to apply it to, but some kind of a basic guide that the campground owner might be required to follow doesn't sound like a bad idea to me. I mean, if you call it an operations manual or whatever you want to call it, maybe you call it something different, but.
Yeah, and again, I think this conversation is based on if the city council decides that some of the issues brought up during this discussion they feel is warranted. I think that would be the better spot to put it rather than putting it into the zoning ordinance. That is the spot where we have chosen as a municipality to put those types of regulations, not in the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, because it's going to be impossible to chase all the little scenarios, and you don't want to be too restrictive. I mean, you want creativity. At the same time, you do still have to protect the residents. So, I mean, that is a touchy topic.
Okay, so after all this, are there any other areas that the board feels that we need to continue to talk through before we send Aaron off to draft? Or Aaron, do you have any questions for us?
Yeah, I would love to hear more about the land use table and how other members of the board feel as far as which zones it's allowed in and whether or not to continue the use as, I believe it's permitted with review right now. The topic has come up, it could be a conditional use, which then provides a different slew of requirements that you're able to place on any use. So just a general discussion about the land use table, not just the ordinance, would be great.
So I guess as I look at that, I've read through these and I wanted to see what other businesses were allowed in this and really trying to get an understanding of how this all works. I mean, permitted by review, to me, says conditional use. It's not just automatic. I think one of our challenges as a city is our conditional uses. It's very hard for us to say yes or no, right? Our conditions that go along with our conditional uses are definitely lacking. So before I'd want to go down that path. I'd want to have a very clear plan, and I welcome the board's opinion on that as well.
Well, if we go conditional use, we have to come up with conditions, don't we?
And that's what I'm saying, is
Yeah.
we have a lot of conditional uses that we don't have very good conditions for.
Right.
So it comes in front of us, and it's effectively a permitted use, because the conditions that have been put in place over a number of years don't have enough detail behind them to actually help us make a decision.
Well, and we'd
So it
have
drives
to
us to yes.
Right, and we'd have to be consistent with.
Well,
what-
and that's it too. It needs to be consistent and enforceable. Sorry.
No, you're finishing my sentence.
Yeah, my past experience with conditional use has been it's conditional on who's on the board.
I mean, we have an ordinance that allows utility scale solar in select zones. That's a conditional use, and in those conditions, that is one area where we did list more conditions specific to that use. Meaning if it was farmland, they have to demonstrate why, they have to save all of the rich organic topsoil. So we did allow utility scale solar in certain zones with conditions, and we did define those conditions better for that particular use. So I would 100% agree that if you go down the path of trying to make this a conditional use, that we would have to better define those conditions like we did in that ordinance.
Any more on that? Is the board leaning on in that direction to go conditional use or continue as permitted with review?
I think right now it makes sense to keep it as permitted with review.
I agree. Conditional use is just going to drag
One thing I
this
think
out.
about is, a couple years from now, who's to say the same board members would still be here? And then what those conditions may
change over time? For sake of consistency?
So just for clarity's sake, a permitted with review use means it needs to come before the planning board regardless of the size. I think one of the provisions that we're discussing is the minimum lot size, which would also probably trigger that major site plan review.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yes.
But I think it makes sense, considering we are revising this ordinance, that the review would include the provisions of this ordinance and not necessarily need a secondary conditional use. But there's potential for some interpretation on certain elements of the ordinance if that's what the board would like to keep in there. For instance, like the vegetated buffer, we're going to come up with a definition of that, but we also will probably have some options in there, which is typical of other buffers. It could be a fence, a berm, a tree line of a certain height, or a combination of these is something
That
that,
would be consistent even for any use.
Right.
We've done that in multiple areas.
it already exists in other places in our ordinance. So in that instance, then there is still some level of interpretation that the board has to do during their review.
I would struggle to put it in conditional use. I know we've talked about rural residential and we focus on the residential piece of the rural, but it's still a balancing act between rural uses and residential. It's not strictly for residential. Those zones are designated growth areas. I still am of the opinion that a campground is a rural use.
And again, just as a reminder, we are now, I'm going to say, a third of the way through our comprehensive plan update process. And with that, could possibly create new zones. It could create change in the lines of our existing zones. It could mean lots of things. So this discussion is really temporarily based, because we will be having this discussion again once we start the comprehensive zoning updates after the comprehensive plan. So we will have another stab at this apple, because we're gonna be talking about ordinances citywide and across the board after the comprehensive plan has finished its update. And we do suspect that zone lines are going to be, in some cases, substantially modified.
Right. Thanks, Jamie. Aaron, did you need anything else from us to move forward?
No, I just wanted to make sure that all the board members felt like they had a chance to share their opinions, or if there's any other topic that need to be discussed.
If I could just bring up one thing.
Go ahead.
On the subject of on-site management, would that be covered in like a licensing provision? You would see that covered in a licensing provision? Okay.
That's I think that's something that would be better placed in the licensing provision.
Okay. And the same thing with the seasonality issue?
Seasonality, I would agree that all of the ordinances that we reviewed, most of them had the discussion on seasonality. So I think it's fair to say that that could be in the zoning ordinance if the city council doesn't do a licensing chapter. But if they do a licensing chapter, I think it could fit in either one.
Yeah, so I think we have to consider it, because if they don't do a licensing chapter, we're going to want to consider a seasonality piece of this. Right, so we're going to want to make sure it's at least included if licensing isn't picked up, if the licensing chapter is not picked up, correct?
So we should make a recommendation either for or against, one way or the other.
Right, so we did discuss, and I think we came to a pretty close consensus on it, and like I said, we're not set on that, we can always change it, but I believe it was to align with the other ordinance that already regulates how long you can stay in a campsite, or in a camper on the private property in a yard, which is April 15th to November 1st. I understand that's in a yard and not in a campground, but the intent, and really the intent behind the moratorium was safety, right? So the piece that got us here was because there was concern about people sleeping in ill-equipped. And I'm not saying that there aren't equipped campers that can handle it, but that's why it came to us this way.
More to the point, I mean, if you're discussing how long somebody can stay in one place, if you're more than 6 months in one place, that's your permanent residence, is that correct?
Under state statute, that is one defining factor if you're a resident of that community, yes.
So you wouldn't, I'm not sure how to word this. I mean, if you're staying in a campground more than 6 months, that would be a permanent residence under state law, is that right? Am I reading
I'm not
too much into that?
100%, I don't have the rule in front of me, but yes, I understand it as 6 months is one of the deciding factors on if you could be declared a resident at that point. I would have to review the state statute before I say 100% that's the correct answer, but.
So potentially, if campgrounds were given more time, they would have to kick people out before the 6 months timeline.
179 days.
I spent a little bit of time looking up campground ordinances in warmer states where it might be year-round, and a lot of them said they had limits where I could only stay for 3 months, 4 months, whatever they said. I have to leave for a night and then come for another 3 months, and I have to leave for a night. So
Yeah, it doesn't mean you can't rent a site for the entire season, you just can't.
you just can't be on it
There,
for
but-
X amount of consecutive days.
I know, and we saw in some other ordinances that there was a statement saying that you cannot use a campground as your reason for residence, or however that wording is. So yeah, it'd be interesting to look at the state statute to make sure we aren't creating an unenforceable standard.
I will make sure I review that statute before next discussion.
Could I propose a strategy?
Sure.
With seasonality, I think by and large, the campgrounds that we will see will be seasonal. That doesn't rule out that at some point a campground might want to go year-round, but could we not make the year-round campground conditional use? Keep seasonal campgrounds permitted with review, the conditional uses, then we could put conditions specifically for, like that with the 6-month rules, with the installation value in the campers, or winterization and so forth, as a discussion for another time when such idea comes up.
That would be an option.
I think I'd prefer to keep it seasonal and cross that bridge when, a future city council or a future planning board comes to it, they can address it.
And again, even if you decide this round that you want it seasonal from dates defined, and then a year from now, we start talking about ordinances in general, and we get to campgrounds, and at that point, something's changed. We're doing this as hopefully a longer-term ordinance, but that doesn't mean we can't make amendments to it at any point if we've determined what we've done isn't working, or Jack brought up climate change. So say next year, something major happens and we no longer have cold weather, that we become southern Florida instead of southern Maine. We could always revisit and change the ordinance. So, I mean, there's always the option of revising at any given point. Obviously, we don't want to do this every month, but if something changes or technology evolves or whatever, this is a ordinance revision, but we are allowed to modify ordinances really at any given point with this process.
Any other input from the board? All set? All right. We will move on to planning director's report.
First, I want to say thank you to all the people that came, all the comments we received, all the work with the board, all the work of staff. This is a challenge that we're all embracing, and I think when we're all said and done, hopefully we have an ordinance that works for everybody involved. It's a tall task, but I think everybody's handling it professionally. The applications are still rolling in. I think we're continuing to see subdivisions and the like be our predominant reviews. We got 2 more in the office today, both decently sized subdivisions. So I think we are going to continue to click through these both land division subdivisions as well as apartments. So keep your spirits high and your Cheerios well stocked. We're going to continue this process we've been now going straight at for quite a while with.
I appreciate it.
One quick question on Jamie.
Okay, go ahead, Lenny.
Yeah, just a quick question. Are you getting any applications for any additional businesses that are coming in or looking at Sanford? Anything that you can mention at the moment?
We don't have any active or applications received for new businesses. I can say that I've had lots of conversations with prospective businesses, none of which have materialized as of yet. So there is definitely interest in Sanford. The Industrial Development Corp has purchased additional land in the industrial park area to enlarge our industrial park, and we already have prospective, we've had meetings with prospective tenants for land that isn't even ready to develop yet. So yes, we still do have businesses that are in discussion points, but none with active applications.
Thank you. Before I go on to board communications, is there anything else from staff? You guys all set? Okay, switching to communications, I'll just echo what Jamie said. I mean, obviously, we're sitting here volunteering to do this. We are really trying to listen to both sides of this. Our goal is not to take one side or the other. We're really just trying to navigate through this, make the best decisions for the city of Sanford. And as we go through this, we appreciate your patience as we work on this pretty daunting task, to be honest with you. So, any other communications from the board?
Does Sanford have an ordinance for windmills?
Yes, very short and sweet, but we had one windmill get installed in Springvale, I'm going to say 10 years ago. So we actually did create a very small ordinance on windmills. That windmill was installed. It was installed in a spot that didn't get any wind, so it was removed. But yes, we do have small provisions in there for windmills.
That's how the state is interested in windmills now for electricity. And I know they've got some regulation on farmland. If it's good farm soil, the developer has to pay a fee. They want to put solar on there.
So I think if windmills become the next solar panels, then we'll be having a discussion on updating our windmill ordinance, because it's not very, it's not a comprehensive section of the ordinance. I'll word it that way.
One of those conditional uses that we don't have very good conditions for.
Probably.
Anything else on the board?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?